Welcome to the Everything Podcast, and in this episode I'm going to be recapping the Big Finish podcast episode released on the 18th of July 2025 titled Sarah and Harry. And I'm recording this episode just a couple of days later on the 21st of July 2025. Before I get on with my recap, here is the trailer for this episode of the Big Finish podcast.
Big Finish for the love of stories.
Nick and Benji.
Hello to you all, and especially you. Oh, I'm Benji Clifford, he's Nick Briggs. Yes. This is Big Finish, audiobooks, audio drama, and this podcast, all for the love of stories.
In a few moments, Benji and I will be chatting about San Diego Comic-Con. Really?
Then it'll be time for the Good Review Guy to showcase the reviews of the Fifth Doctor Adventures in the Night, starring that there Peter Davison.
This was actually the first story I ever heard after leaving Gallifrey.
Then we go behind the scenes with Wednesday the 23rd of July's release, Smith and Sullivan Reunited. The Caller by Tim Foley, featuring Sadie Miller as Sarah, Chris Naylor as Harry, and John Leeson as K9.
Don't mind me, just checking the fire doors.
If it isn't Sarah Jane Smith.
Harry, I don't believe it. Oh,
Next up, listeners' emails sent to podcast@bigfinish.com. More from the inbox of delight.
Straight after that, it'll be time for the Randomoid Selectatron, where we randomly select a Big Finish release and offer you a 25% discount on it. What will it be? Here's a clue.
The Cybermen are coming. We've got to get out of here. Come on.
And finally, as always, we round things off with the 15-minute drama tease. This week it's from Smith and Sullivan Reunited, The Caller by Tim Foley.
You know, it's rather interesting.
what is?
A car just like this tried to run me over earlier.
Plenty of mini metros in London.
So yes, VamPD, our vampire
yeah.
series, is going to be at San Diego Comic-Con.
That was the trailer for this Big Finish podcast episode. Without further ado, here's my recap of the Big Finish podcast episode titled Sarah and Harry. A clip from Smith and Sullivan Reunited could be heard. Nick and Benji introduced this episode whilst mentioning what this episode of the Big Finish podcast will contain. Nick mentions VamPD and San Diego Comic-Con. Benji mentions Star Wars. Nick doesn't know where San Diego is. Benji mentions LA and Phoenix. Benji reveals why he knows about San Diego. Benji mentions Jurassic Park The Lost World. Nick mentions Lissy Wordle and Jason Hay Gallery as well as Scott Walker. Nick and Benji discuss Scott Walker and his albums. Benji mentions Walker's crisps. Nick mentions salt and vinegar rice cakes. Benji reveals his issues with rice cakes. Nick mentions his son. Benji mentions salt and vinegar crisps. Nick and Benji discuss hot weather. Benji names drops a website. Benji tests this website. Nick mentions heat waves. Benji mentions mosquitoes. Nick and Benji discuss water boatmen and dragonflies. Nick mentions his wife and where his son and wife are where his son and wife are currently. Nick mentions Venice. Nick reveals why he won't let other people look after his cat. Nick reveals he is currently no, that's not even there. Nick reveals that he is directing on the Third Doctor Adventures over the next few days. The trailer for the Fifth Doctor Adventures in the Night can be heard. Nick and Benji read multiple reviews of the Fifth Doctor Adventures in the Night. Nick does an impression of K9. Benji makes a cat noise. Benji helps Nick pronounce a particular name. One of the reviews mentions Classic Who Season 20. Another of the reviews mentions 1983. Nick and Benji discuss a potential documentary. Nick reveals the next episode the next episode's Good Review Guy will focus on Once and Future, the Martian Invasion of Planetoid 50, which is the Once and Future release that stars David Tennant as the 10th Doctor, Michelle Gomez as Missy, Neve McIntosh as Madame Vastra, Katrin Stewart as Jenny Flint, and Dan Starkey as Strax. Some behind the scenes from Smith and Sullivan Reunited can be heard. These behind the scenes contain several clips from Smith and Sullivan Reunited. David Richardson is mentioned. Sadie Miller mentions K9 and Company, Harry, the Doctor, and the Sarah Jane Adventures. Christopher Naylor mentions Harry, Sarah Jane, and Unit. Someone compliments Tim Foley and mentions K9 and John Leeson. This person mentions a time where John Leeson corrected him. John Leeson mentions K9 in America. John reveals what happened the first time he visited America. Benji reveals Smith and Sullivan reunited. Releases on the 23rd of July. Benji mentions the Big Finish podcast's email address. Nick and Benji read multiple emails from Big Finish listeners. Nick and Benji mention Arizona. Benji reads out a review of The Crooked Putter. Nick mentions AI, his mum, his granddad, World War I, France, Ireland, a drama podcast, a donkey, the Battle of the Somme, and his dad. These emails mention various recipes, Doctor Who Reimagined, the 4th, 6th, 11th, and 13th Doctors, Sasha Dewan's Master, Sarah Jane, Once and Future, Tomb of the Cybermen, Time Flight, Sherlock Holmes 2033, Google Search, the UK, Kansas, Unit, Brave New World, and Alfie Shaw. Nick mentions WhatsApp and scones. Nick and Benji mention Rosemary. Nick attempts an American accent. Nick mentions Sherlock Holmes Untold, releasing in October, which we'll be recapping on the podcast. Now, that's quite a different release because that's got new episodes every week. Benji mentions an unearthly child, Barbara, Ian, the First Doctor, the Second Doctor, the Smugglers, Poldark, Reddit, Blink and the Daleks. Nick mentions the Caves of Androzani, Tom Baker and Stephen Moffat. Nick and Benji discuss the Nightmare of Eden. The Random One Selectron has chosen the Fourth Doctor Adventures Return to Telos. The trailer for the Fourth Doctor Adventures Return to Telos can be heard. Nick reveals he wrote and directed the story whilst mentioning Fraser Hines. Benji reveals how the Random One Selectron discount can be redeemed. Nick reveals that the Big Finish podcast episode will return on the 1st of August, which is like in just under 2 weeks' time. And this episode of the Big Finish podcast episode finishes with the first 15 minutes of Smith and Sullivan reunited, The Caller, and new episodes of the Big Finish podcast released Fridays at around 9 AM UK time, apart from this week coming, where there isn't one, but as I said, it returns on the 1st of August. But that is my recap of the Big Finish podcast episode titled Sarah and Harry, and let me know what you thought about it in the comments below if you listened to it. My recap, if you didn't, you put your thoughts on both of those in the comments below, as well as anything else you want to go to the channel, such as any previews or recaps, put those in the comments below as well. Remember, you can also like, comment and subscribe, and just before I go, just a reminder that there are now 2 episodes of the podcast released every single day, with the first episode released at 11 AM GMT and the second episode released at 3 PM GMT. And that is it for this episode of the podcast. So I will see you in a future episode of the podcast. And we have got my recaps of The Fugitive Doctor, Dead or Alive, to come soon as well. But without further ado, that's it for this episode of the Everything Podcast. Goodbye.